Here in the town of Warwick lies a lost garden, which harks back to an age of innocent pleasure from another century. But now this garden lies neglected. How did it become abandoned to nature? Who created it? And what was happening here 100 years ago? We have just 5 days to unravel this story and to unearth the evidence which will enable us to restore the garden back to its former glory.
A large gate.
It's a cold, frosty morning on the edge of Warwick Racecourse, and together with Dr. Toby Musgrave, a garden historian, and Dr. Twigs Way, a landscape archaeologist, we're heading to the site of our lost garden. And this one is unusual. It's a garden within a garden. Our only information is a map reference.
Well, look, hang on a moment. We're going to go in here.
Oh, right.
Twigs will find clues in the lie of the land, and the plants will tell Toby the story behind the garden.
Certainly is a lost garden.
Right, come up through here. Wonderful pear
Oh my
tree here.
goodness.
Oh.
There is that extraordinary
Beautiful.
building.
That's so Victorian.
It looks like a small railway station waiting room, doesn't it?
And that building is your map reference.
Aha.
Right,
so we're
we
here.
finally got
This is
here.
our plot.
So here you are,
Superb view.
and there is our racecourse where we've walked up from. Twigs, root around and see if you can find something from the structures.
Right, I'm going to head for that building.
But also on the site, anything you can find. Toby, look at the plants, see if we can find some introductions,
Okay.
tie a date to it, because that's what I'm after at the moment.
Right.
It won't be possible to achieve what we're hoping to do without Anne-Marie Powell, our landscaper. Based on Toby and Twig's evidence, she has 5 days to plan the garden and, with a team of landscapers and volunteers, restore it back to how it was. With a derelict building in the middle of a very overgrown site, she's set for a busy week.
I presume that they're wanting to do a complete restoration on this building.
Yeah. This building is the centre of it.
Because the tiles are completely off the roof, aren't they?
Well, the whole thing is dodgy.
Yeah.
So,
That is a lot of work. I want to get cracking on that. We need scaffolding up in it.
Well, Anne-Marie has plenty to do, and Toby is busy identifying and dating all the plants in our plot. If we're lucky, this might lead us to the date of the garden.
We've got the pears.
another lovely pear.
They're seem to be the oldest plants that we've got. Here
What
we've
about
got-
this grass going
I
down?
mean, the
What's
one
that
thing the
telling you?
grass doesn't have is a huge growth of weed, which suggests that this hasn't been left for an awfully long time.
Now, that's your Lanicera, isn't it?
That's the Lanicera nitida, yeah. It's a type of honeysuckle. It's used as a hedging plant. I think it's from Japan or China, but we can check the date of introduction, which will give us a date when it has to be planted after.
And does it give you a clue on the style? I mean, when was it popular?
It's very popular in sort of Edwardian gardens, still popular today, so
Right.
there's no definite, we can't say it's definitely this
Right.
period.
So that's your bit of privet.
Yep, which again is one of those plants that was so widely used as a hedging plant to sort of define boundaries. So it could be possible that it ran down here defining this area.
You say was so widely used. When?
Whole of this century going back into Victorian times. Again, this Victorian word keeps coming up. No, the
Toby isn't getting very far, but the evidence does seem to show that this garden was used until recently. Meanwhile, Twigs is making progress with her research. We've set up our base in this garden hut. It holds books and plant catalogues from the Royal Horticultural Society and has access to local information, including the Warwick County Record Office. Twigs loses no time in wading through the old maps of Warwick to see if she can get any nearer to dating the garden. Our site seems to be one of many gardens set out in a distinctive grid pattern, and here the 1887 OS map gives Twigs our first real clue to what our garden was like.
This is the 1887.
Where are we?
We are
There, that's our summer house. The
We've
one.
certainly got an avenue of trees flanking
we'll
the
have to try
path.
and sort out whether these could
This is a
actually be the
wonderful-
remainders of them.
So this
and
suggests
fantastic detail of paths and everything.
we've
It's
got a line
fabulous.
of trees.
I think we ought to roll it
Yeah.
up because it's
Yeah.
going to come on to rain.
Right, so we clearly have got work to do on that.
Yes.
But it shows us the layout.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
a
if we-
fantastic plan.
But if that exists, that dates it, doesn't it?
Well, this dates, it was built by 1887, but the map before that's 1866 and it's not on, so we've got this kind of 22-year
1866
gap.
to 1887.
So we now know that the summer house sat at the top of the garden, overlooking a path, flanked with trees, and this gives Anne-Marie something to get on with. But there was clearly more to the garden than just this. The Victorian period was a boom time for gardening, and everyone from the highest to the lowest had a go at it. The country cottage style, with a mix of vegetables and flowers, would have had interesting new plant varieties and have been full of colour. This is a start, but Toby needs to do more plant research to find out the specifics. In the meantime, at least we can get started on the summer house, which is looking a little worse for wear. The first job for Anne-Marie's team of specialist restorers is to clear it of all the debris that's piled up over the years of neglect. It's going to be tough, but their 5-day goal is to reinstate the tiled roof, make it weatherproof, and to put back in the wooden floor.
Toby, I've done something rather clever. What I've done is the sites over there I did earlier on today.
Right.
I've put that over the top of your 1887
Oh, excellent.
map.
Good idea, good idea.
So I'm hoping that you're going to tell me finally which trees can go.
Yeah.
So what about that one?
That one's on there, that's that one, so that's got to stay. That one's staying, that one's staying, that one's going.
So the 2 giant pears will remain, but 5 trees that are too young or diseased are to go. But these trees won't go to waste. They'll be chipped down into mulch and then put back onto the soil to condition it. Now, the investigations continue. We've gone to look around at what lies between us and the racecourse, and we've found 32 similar gardens, which, like our garden, aren't attached to their own house. As you walk around them, the thing which strikes you most is the wonderful selection of different summer houses on the plots.
There we are. What do you make of that?
Oh, it's wonderful. Look at the fireplace.
Go and have a look.
Beautifully proportioned.
Right. Well, let's move on.
God, chilly.
Yeah, there's frost, isn't there?
Yeah.
I need to get clear from you two exactly what these gardens are about. What's happening here?
I think they're leisure gardens, ones that people came to for enjoyment and to plant flowers as well as things like fruit trees.
So they're not allotments?
No, they're just different.
I think they're a blend. I think they're this idea of utility. We've got fruit and beauty, the house and the view, and ornamental plants. I think this is a group
Series.
of gardens.
At the end of our first day, it looks like we'll be restoring a Victorian pleasure garden. Anne-Marie is desperate for more information so she can get on, and Twigs and Toby are under real pressure to get to the bottom of what the garden actually looked like. Tomorrow is going to be a busy day, and the weather forecast is not promising.
I'm really pleased with the progress that we had last night. The carpenters were working till 9 o'clock. It's all cordoned off now. The scaffolding is coming in and they're going to be working really late today, I think, as well. But happy, the guys from Warwickshire College have arrived. They're our volunteer helpers. And what we're going to do is we've got a couple of turf cutters here and I'm going to get them onto that job in a minute.
Typically, Anne-Marie throws the volunteers in at the deep end. Cutting up frosted turf is no picnic. She's waiting for Toby to say what will go in its place, but as it's choked with weeds, it's got to go. And by 10 o'clock, it's all gone. At our Lost Gardens HQ, Toby is hard at work.
Right, let's see what sources I've got on the database. I have a rummage through to find this guy's name. Let's go into it. Right, we've got the Warwick Record Office.
Toby soon finds our man. In 1879, James Thacker was renting the plot for just £2 a year. In the deeds for the following year, Thacker now appears to have bought the plot, and that's not the only change.
The rateable value has jumped from £2 to £6. Now that's just that light bulb goes on in one's head, and to me the reason that the rateable value went up so much by £4 is because the summer house was built. So I'm confident to say that this garden dates from 1880 and that we should look to restore the garden back to that date.
James Thacker was certainly a man of taste. Not only is his summer house full of exquisite details, albeit rather neglected these days, but the two-storey building also had a water closet in the basement. The restorers won't be putting that back, but with a floor and a whole roof to replace, they have their week's work cut out.
Come on! Go!
Now that the garden is clear, Twiggs can track down the path she saw on the 1887 map.
Oh, there we go. Gosh, that's quite a stylish edging, isn't it? So that's one edge, and I think the other edge is probably more or less where that tree stump was, so I should be in the middle somewhere. There we go. Oh, it's clinker. Oh, wow. I thought we were going to have flagstones, but look at this. And it's great big lumps of it that have come adrift. But it's clinker material. It's made of ash. It's quite a popular Victorian pathing. But I must admit, with such nice edging, I did think we were going to have flags or brickwork. Well, there you go. You can't argue with the evidence. It's a clinker path, I'm afraid.
So, Twiggs has found part of the original path. But of course, things are never that simple, and there's conflicting evidence at the other end of the garden near the summer house.
Oh, Richard, you found something hard.
Yeah, I think this path must have been paved originally.
And all the rest of it.
I think this is the mortar bed, and so I think we're looking at that part of it must have been clinker.
And part of it
and part of it's paved, so I think it's paved up to the house.
And we've ordered clinker.
And we've ordered clinker.
I'm gonna have to get on the phone. I don't know if we're gonna get this in time.
Well, it's going to be tight.
Well, we're gonna have to have a go. Okay.
All right, and
Keep digging.
thank you, Dave.
It's taken Toby a while, but he has found from the 1881 town census that James Thacker lived above his grocer's shop in the middle of Warwick.
Aha, there's an advert for Thacker and Christmas. They must have advertised in the paper. Let's see what he's selling. Thacker and Christmas, High Street, Warwick. Finest new fruits for the season: raisins, currants, sultanas, figs, muscatels. Also a large stock of cheese. Finest cheddar, gorgonzola, Gruyere and Parmesan. So that suggests that he's running quite a market establishment, importing cheeses from Europe, which I guess was fairly unusual at the time.
It's lunchtime now, day 2, and we've been fantastically lucky with the weather, but I'm looking at bad weather coming in, and from all over the country they've had snow and all sorts of things, so it's not going to last. I know that Toby has found our man, we've got the date, and he's gone off to see if he can get more information about it. And work here has rather eerily just quietly progressed. It's looking good, it's looking fine, and we're in control, and all these different pieces are funneling together to the final product.
To find out more about what our garden might have been like, Toby has gone to meet 90-year-old Arthur Measures, head of Warwickshire Gardens Trust. In his beautiful garden in the shadow of Warwick Castle, Arthur shed some light on what Warwick's detached pleasure gardens were like back in 1914.
Every single one of them had fruit trees, apples, pears, plums. They all grew vegetables and all grew flowers, and they all were places of recreation. And you one would see on a Saturday, perhaps husband and wife coming, carrying a basket, obviously intending to spend the afternoon.
So it was a real sort of occasion, a day out, almost like if you had your own
That's
garden.
right, yes. The gardens were extremely well protected by wonderful hedges.
Right.
A great pleasure in it was the fact that they were so very, very secluded. You got inside, you closed the solid wooden gate, and no one could see what you were doing, or not that I ever misbehaved. It was nice to be private.
I was looking at how much it cost to rent one of these, and it was quite a lot of money. So the people who bought them and who made the gardens must have been sort of quite the well-to-do of the town.
Well, they were mostly tradespeople who lived in little houses or perhaps above a shop, no garden of their own.
And so these detached gardens became the treasured private spaces for Warwick's middle classes. Arthur has given us valuable insight into the world of James Thacker. As a high-class grocer, he was a man of substance, and I'm sure he wouldn't have settled for the ordinary. He was after a sophisticated cottage garden which would provide him both with pleasure and produce.
Well, it's day 3, and I'm on my way up to the garden, and we've established now from Toby that it's James Thacker, local businessman of some standing, who owned this plot and built the summer house, and the date, 1880. So what I really want them to do today is to find out more about Victorian life. How did they live? How did they approach their gardens and use them? And also, I know Anne-Marie is going to be desperate to finalise the plans.
Monty, I must say I'm a bit concerned because this is the only survey plan that I've got so far of the garden, and there's just one path going down the middle.
Right.
I mean,
whoa.
what's going in here?
I feel like one of Mrs. Thatcher's cabinet ministers. Steady down, it's not my fault. This is all we've got.
Monty, I've got 20 men here. We've already dug out this central path. We've got all the turf off, and I need to know what's going in here. Otherwise, the work's just going to stop, and I don't want that to happen.
The turf is now up. The central path is being edged with authentic Victorian tiles that we found at a local reclamation yard, and they're a perfect match for the ones Twiggs found yesterday. But what about the rest of the garden? To get the job done, it's vital for Anne-Marie to know more about what was on either side of the pathway. Well, these men might just fill the gaps. They're the earliest living link we have to Thacker's garden. Philip and Jim Durrant spent their childhood in this garden in the 1940s, and we hope they might remember how it was before it fell into neglect.
I don't suppose you've got any pictures from...
Over the page.
Over the page this way?
Yes, that's it, one, that's it. That's the summer house.
So who's sitting on the steps there?
Well, my mother's one.
Yeah.
That'll be Kath, that's a friend of the family.
And there are the
She came down.
steps.
They're on the steps, yes. And, of course, she came down.
And there it is again.
That's my mother again, and her youngest sister, Aunt Cicely. And then the small one there is taken it to the right of the summer house.
And who's the boy?
That'll be Philip, I'm sure of that.
I was the smallest, so if Dad had a few pears on this Duchess pear tree, which he couldn't reach, he used to hold the ladder vertically and then send me up the ladder. And I don't know whether he took his hat off to drop the odd pears into, but that's how we got the last ones down.
This is fascinating. The garden doesn't seem to have changed in the 30 years between Thacker's death and the Durrants' arrival. And the similarities don't end there. The Durrants were ironmongers. They lived above their shop too, with no garden of their own, and they also used this plot for recreation. So this family used it as a pleasure garden in a way the Victorians would have recognised.
There was lawns at the top, just a small area of lawn, and then the rest was a production garden. It was a vegetable and fruit garden.
I'm glad that somebody wants to know of our memories because they won't be lost, but it's brought back no end of memories for us, and to see it back to what it was, or near to what it was, it's wonderful.
Because it won't be quite the same as when you were here.
Well, we're not as old as that.
No, well...
They're pretty ancient, but not that old.
Yeah.
Apart from the OS map of 1887, there's very little direct evidence for what Mr. Thacker's plot would have looked like. But now the Durrants have told us that there were lawns in front of the summer house for recreation, and Arthur Meadows said it would have been surrounded by a high hedge. From his knowledge of Victorian gardens, Toby has decided that in the middle of the garden we'll plant our fruit and vegetable beds. For easy maintenance, there would have been a network of paths, and these will go back in. Flowers and fruit trees will border the central path, and down at the bottom we'll have another lawn for recreation. A bench and beehives will complete the Victorian pleasure garden. So now we know what we need. And Toby can get on with his plant list so Anne-Marie can order up the plants in time. For this, he'll use Victorian plant catalogues lent by the Royal Horticultural Society.
We've got a Carter's seed catalogue for 1880, and this lists new, rare and choice plants. Throughout the whole of this late 19th century period, there were hundreds of new plants being introduced and thousands of new varieties. Horticulture was really going through a boom time. We know Thacker was quite wealthy and well-heeled, and he may well have gone for these unusual plants or the new varieties to show a bit of status in his garden. We've got lists of dahlias. I mean, in 1880, we have the cactus dahlia was very new. It arrived or was cultivated in the late 1870s, so he may have gone for those for a bit of novelty, if you like. And again, this idea of bedding plants. Bedding was a very, very popular thing at the time. You'd put out your bedding plants in the summer, as you do today, but there were always competitions within towns to see who could have the best bedding display. There was a enormous challenge in growing the biggest and the best. I mean, got an example here. This is 1881, and at a flower show, the top prize for growing the best bundle of asparagus was £4, and we know that the rent here was £6, so that's nearly a whole year's rent just for the best asparagus. Lord, cucumber's about 4 feet long. Looking through these catalogues, we've got a lot of potential for a very good planting plan.
Before we can plant, we have some problems to solve. The borders are marked with cut timber, but the soil in them is full of couch grass. And that's a persistent weed with underground runners, and if not completely removed, will choke all future planting. Anne-Marie has had to recruit 5 extra volunteers to help dig it out.
Hard, honest work in the garden was seen by Victorian improvers as a very good way of keeping the working man out of the beer house. And if he dug his garden hard, it had to be hard physical work, wasn't any good pottering about, it meant that he wouldn't be spending money in the pub and he'd be improving his moral worth. And I'm sure these gardens here would have been deeply dug by people who, in the process, were not drinking, were making themselves better Christian members of a society. And there was an enormous sort of moral overload on the simple act of gardening.
Not only did the Victorians set their own rules about the morals of labour, they were also gadget mad, with catalogues full of ingenious tools for the avid gardener.
I saw in the catalogue some old garden tools, and I just thought it would be fun to see if we could get a hold of some. So here they are. And they're quite mad, some of them.
See, this is a seed saw.
Yeah. That's right.
Look, I mean, you probably know all about this, but I love the way that makes the drill, and that closes it. The angle, you know when you sow seeds and you sort of go like that?
Yeah.
It just crimps it shut. It's so simple. Look at that.
No.
An apple picker.
Have a go.
Okay. No apples.
Pretend.
Okay, I'll pretend. Okay, nice juicy apple up there. It's just perfect.
But look at these.
Those are lovely. Those are really lovely. And see, really sophisticated. You should.
I much prefer to use a petrol-driven hedge trimmer, though. Some of the things are ridiculous. Because they used to use horses a lot to mow their lawn, they actually had these shoes made.
Yeah, I remember. I've got pictures of my grandfather.
Walking up and down.
And because of brilliant, but that's what I mean by sophisticated. It's not ridiculous, it's thought through within the parameters they worked in. We had a horse, good way of pulling a mower, because because it wasn't mechanised, and you don't want to damage the lawn that you're cutting.
Can you imagine if we had to use these tools to build this garden? We would be here till next year, Monty.
Well, we'd do it properly, though. We'd do it just as well as you will with your machinery, probably better.
But there's no machine that will get rid of couch grass easily, and what's more, the weather has turned nasty.
Well, the builder's been driven away by the rain. Are you going to be able to get more done tonight?
Well, we're going to keep going until it's dark, but the rain's come. We've achieved quite a lot. We've got all of the pathways marked and all the edgings in, so that's good. But there's still a lot to be done. We've got loads of couch grass.
I know.
In our vegetable plot.
Well, it's 8:45 now. You've got 2 days to go. Are you going to be there at the end? In the right place, everything done?
Can you come and see me tomorrow?
We will.
I'm not sure.
Really?
Yeah. I just thought we'd walk around the garden and have a look to see all the jobs are going ahead really as planned, because there's still quite a lot to do, isn't there? So Richard and his guys got these edgings in, but this needs to be levelled a little bit. We'll get some Mypex down and then put down clinker at this end. Yeah? So that's just a case of barrowing. And then all the other paths are exactly the same, just Mypex and then clinker on the top. But up the top area near the summer house, we're going to be laying some slabs. So I don't know if any of you are any good at sort of 5-spot method or dry bed method or... Any? Are you? What?
John, how's it going?
Panic stations this morning. Yesterday, you'll be aware we had that rain. It slowed us down. We're having some problems with the barge boards. When we took the original roof off, we obviously did an inspection, assessed how the original construction was made, and they used haired lime mortar for the eaves and for the verges.
So why has this got hair in it?
It makes it stronger. Hair reinforces the mortar, makes it more flexible.
What type of hair do you use?
This is yak hair. It's a Tibetan cow.
So what do you want to get, what must you get done today?
Well, this is not a felted roof. We must get the tiles on. Even if we don't get all the little finishing touches done, we must get the tiles on.
All right. I see that look in your eye. You're under pressure, aren't you?
We are,
all right.
yes.
I'll let you get on.
OK, thanks.
The Victorians were meticulous in their garden preparation, and their attitude to the lawn was a good example of this. It was with the Victorian age that the British fanaticism for lawns first started. We're following in their footsteps by preparing a fine bed of soil on which to lay our grass turf.
The Victorians approached the fertilisation of their ground with typical zeal and thoroughness, and they, in modern terms anyway, were very environmentally friendly because they recycled an awful lot. Wood ash from the fire would be put on the garden. Soot was always used in the garden. They'd use the night soil if they had an earth closet. But there was one ingredient which they had more than enough of, which was superb. And where they had horses and they had straw, they had manure. And really, there was only one thing that any Victorian garden needed, and that was this.
For the vegetable beds, there are 300 barrows of manure to go in. But not everyone seems to share my Victorian enthusiasm for the stuff. With all this Victorian vigorous dedication to the gardens, how did they get into the terrible state we found them in? Our research shows us that by the 1940s, these gardens had become just like ordinary allotments. Garden historian and local councillor Christine Hodgetts is one of the few people who has studied this forgotten period of garden history.
Well, I think because the sort of people for whom the gardens were originally created mainly stopped needing a garden. You see, the shopkeepers, the solicitors, the estate agents who lived over the shop, you can see the process of them buying villas in the outskirts of the town, and then they didn't need this sort of detached garden anymore. And so gradually the gardens sort of came more down market and were used by the people much more immediately local in those houses that have got really very tiny gardens. And so gradually the difference between this sort of garden and the sort of allotment became less and less clear.
Presumably all over the country, this type of leisure, pleasure garden existed.
You look at any early 19th century map of, of an English town and you'll almost certainly see that telltale area with the hatching on it that shows the hedges and that tells you that there were gardens there. And there were 5 or 6 sites in Warwick.
Really?
The only reason that this one survived was the high quality of the buildings. That's what marks them out from some of the other surviving sites of this type. And of course, as soon as English Heritage had listed some of the buildings, people had to stop and take notice and realise that they were something that was different.
There are now only 4 surviving pleasure garden sites left in the whole of England. These ivy-covered, derelict summer houses were the reason why the Warwick Garden survived. So it's great to see our summer house returning to its former glory. By late afternoon, the house restoration is on target and all the roof tiles are on. But down below, Anne-Marie has had less luck with the flagstones.
I've had a problem actually getting a hold of York stone. It's so expensive as well. So we've got this reconstituted concrete. So we're going to lay this. It looks quite convincing once it's had the edges taken away from it by painting yoghurt or liquid manure in it, gathers the mould. But it's also much quicker to lay as well because it's a nice uniform thickness and this is going to save us time and money.
To finish the paths, Anne-Marie has managed to get some clinker. It's basically a byproduct from coal boilers, which were common in Thacker's time, but tricky to track down today. And she's got lots of it, 100 barrow loads in total. So now at the end of day 4, the bottom lawns are complete, and the summer house now has a watertight roof. And leading down from it, we have a path of flagstones and clinker.
The garden's taking shape, and on the whole, today hasn't gone badly. But there's a lot more to do, and tomorrow we've got to plant it up. At the moment, it's too much garden and not enough pleasure, and these were pleasure gardens. And the pleasure will come with the plants. It's the last day. The scaffolders are here and waiting, and they want to get the scaffolding down. I have a feeling that John isn't ready. John?
Yeah?
Are you ready to pack up now?
Last ridge tile. We're a bit behind schedule. We hoped to have this finished yesterday, but the scaffolders are waiting for us.
Yeah, I know. That's sort of, you know, we're getting...
I mean, we've done well, basically.
All right, OK. So how long do you think it'll be before they can start dismantling?
Oh, 5 minutes.
Really?
Yes.
OK, OK, that's good. That's great.
All right.
Fantastic, yeah.
OK.
OK, let you finish.
Bet it's more like 5 minutes.
15 minutes later, as the last ridge tile goes on, the summer house roof is now fully watertight, which is just as well, because the weather forecast sounds dreadful.
Right, OK, Anne-Marie, I've got you a rough plan of where we're going to put the plants.
Right, so we're at the summer house here.
Yeah.
Now, what are these?
Those are my bedding beds. I mean, it's a Victorian thing. They had to have had bedding schemes in their lawns.
And you tell me now.
Absolutely. Keep you on your toes.
Isn't that going to be a real maintenance nightmare, cutting the grass around these little triangles?
It's not that difficult because it's just the same as clipping the edge of a lawn. It takes a bit more time. It's not a nightmare. And it's something that near to their house they would have had bedding schemes. I mean, we might not like them today and think they're tasteless and yuck, but they would have definitely had them.
I'll put them in if I've got time.
Anne-Marie might not be happy about the elaborate bedding scheme, but the Victorians love them. They came in all geometric shapes and sizes and were densely packed with plants that were changed up to 4 times a year. Keen to get the planting in before the downpour, Anne-Marie has to get on. We're going to plant a rich mix of fruit, vegetables and herbs for the table, and flowers for sheer pleasure. All the essential elements for a Victorian detached pleasure garden. But the Victorians didn't do things by halves. The garden would have been full to the brim. So Toby has picked 3,000 plants and 200 different varieties, all designed to give pleasure throughout the year.
Right, I'm sitting in the middle of the mixed border which flanks either side of the main path, and we're going to plant this in a very country cottage effect. We're going to use perennials, annuals and tender annuals. And this will be very informal, very profuse, and it'll make a lovely approach coming up to the house, the summer house. And this sort of country cottage effect was coming right back into fashion in the 1880s, so from that point of view it's very appropriate. We've got references from the flower shows that were held here in the 1880s. Incredibly popular in the town the size of Warwick, over 1,000 entries into the flower show. So we've got delphiniums, this is a real popular one of the time, beautiful flowers. We've got aquiledias, another lovely sort of country cottagey thing. And this is Salvia argentea, which is not native, but it's got this lovely sort of silvery foliage and big sort of white flowers in the summer. So that's the perennials. As far as the annuals go, we went back to the Sutton's catalogue, produced a huge list of stuff that was available at the time, sent it to Sutton's and said, right, what can you supply us now? And remarkably, they sent us a whole load of stuff that was in their 1880 catalogue and in their 1999 catalogue. So there's a lovely link with the past. We're using the same seed from the same supplier of the same plants. And again, we're just going to scatter this throughout, so you'll have this lovely, profuse, wildy effect as you're coming up. And that will contrast with the formality around the house.
Around the garden's edges, we're planting a mixed hedge of blackthorn and privet. We'll have to be patient, though. It'll be a long time before it provides the seclusion and privacy the Victorians were used to.
Right, what are you going to do about this then?
Hail!
It's pretty horrid.
It is awful.
If this continues and gets wet and really bad, what are you going to do?
Well, if the ground gets too wet, we can't really plant. I don't mind it if it just does it like this for about a quarter of an hour and then stops. That's fine. It's actually quite nice, but
Well,
if it carries on all day, we're all going to get very wet. And so the plants, and they won't
cold.
like it. Yeah.
And miserable.
Yeah.
And cross.
What time is it?
12:10. A bit early for lunch, isn't it? All right, well, let's give
We'll
it
have to see what happens.
5 minutes.
Keep everyone off the soil and off the ground.
I'll go around raising spirits.
Good.
With jokes. Now tell me how this herb garden reflects the man in the time.
Well, I think very Victorian, a lot of different herbs, a wide variety of herbs. I mean, all the herbs were available, so that's not a problem. But what we've done here specifically is to take into consideration the fact that he was selling Italian foods in his deli and sort of hypothesising that he probably ate very well. So we've made a special effort to put Italian herbs in. So we've got oregano, we're going to have basil going in when the weather improves, and we've got things like thyme.
Well, I noticed that they're planted in rows.
Yeah.
Utilitarian.
Absolutely. But again, sort of pretty because we've got the box hedge going around it. So this combination of beauty and utility.
As if a whole day's planting is not enough, Anne-Marie is finally confronted with the reality of Toby's bedding scheme in the top lawns, and it's worse than she thought.
Well, Richard's put in our bedding scheme, but I know you're not too
Your
happy
bedding
about it.
scheme?
My bedding scheme. I know you're not happy about it.
I just think it's too grand for this garden and such a small area of grass. And you're not actually going to get that many plants in them.
We'll get a decent display. Anyway, I've got some evidence, so come and let me show you the evidence why we're putting this in.
I feel
Come
like
on.
I'm in Versailles.
Right, here we go. Here's the evidence. This is the amateur's flower garden, right? Shirley Hibbard, 1875.
Oh, Shirley Hibbard.
And amongst these incredibly intricate designs, enormously intricate, we've got a very simple one in front of a house, scale 1 foot to 1 inch. And if you take that as an inch, that's only 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 feet for a much more ornate design. Our bed's 18 feet.
I just really think that these are just far too small, and I just think they look ridiculous. I just really don't like them.
We'll have to agree to disagree.
I think we will, but they're done.
With only a few hours to go, Anne-Marie and her team have been hard at work planting a traditional Victorian vegetable plot on the sunny side of the garden.
This piece of the vegetable garden has been strongly influenced by this book, which is Mrs. Beeton's book, actually not Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management. And so it means we've included things like sea kale there, which Mrs. Beeton says is remarkably easy to digest, very good for you. And that's a key thing in Victorian cooking. If it was good for you, it must be good to eat. The moral worth and the aesthetic pleasure always entwined. Sea kale, which you harvest from February through to about May, June, and they are absolutely delicious. Artichokes here, which Thacker would have known were special. He would have relished the fact that they were not a sort of run-of-the-mill food. So you have in here a sort of amalgam of Victorian attitude, Victorian cooking, and also the sort of absolute robust pleasure that they got from the good things of life.
But I wonder how much robust pleasure the Victorians would have got from this dreadful weather.
We've got 1 hour to go, and we're just winding down, tidying up, finishing the planting, we get a hailstorm. And immediately the whole thing becomes another disaster, and I've never known a week like this for just being attacked by the weather. I can hear it dying down now. Ugh.
And the hail turns to rain.
Alongside finding out about the history of the garden, I've enjoyed so much this week finding out about James Thacker himself. We've just found his obituary on the last day, and that tells us that as well as all the public duties he carried out, he was also a county councillor. He also gave a lot of money to charity. He was very philanthropic. So he was a very community-based man. He was also a very successful businessman. But this was his retreat. This was his new garden in 1880. He came here to get away from the strict arrangement of life in Victorian times. And here he could relax with his wife, sadly no children, but he could indulge his passion. And his passion was obviously gardening. But I have a sneaking suspicion that as well as his passion for gardening, he had a bit of a passion for the Gee-Gees. Because you look out of the summer house straight down to the finishing line of the Warwickshire racetrack.
The hail finally stops, but now we're running out of light. At least John the Restorer and his team have finished the summer house.
Well, the door opens.
Yes,
It works.
of course.
OK, where have you got to and how do you feel?
Well, exhausted. I think the whole team are. We're also exhilarated and thrilled that we've been able to give you a building which is now weather-tight.
And how do you feel about the summer house in the context with the garden and what we've been doing?
Well, from the bottom, it seems to sit very well. At the moment, with the blossom out, looks very nice.
It looks great to me, and everybody is bowled over by it.
Good, good, yes. Well, I'm looking forward to having a hot bath when I get back to Stroud.
This man has spent the whole week in a caravan and hasn't had a bath or a shower all week.
You're supposed to keep quiet about that.
Our time is finally up. It's amazing that just 5 days ago, this was completely overgrown, and we've restored it back to the garden that was here 120 years ago. Now I can't wait to see what it will look like when the plants have grown. A century ago, James Thacker tended his pleasure garden on this very site. The fruit trees and hedges have a long way to go, but surely he would recognize the herbaceous borders flanking the paths, filled with a profusion of cottage flowers. This was certainly an effect the Victorians loved. And the summer house itself, with its delicate green eaves, takes its place at the heart of the garden. In front of it are the authentic Victorian bedding schemes, crammed full of vibrant asters and pansies, ordered from the 1880s Sutton Seed Catalogue. With their typical gusto, the Victorians changed the bedding plants at least 4 times a year, with winter displays of winter pansies, and in the spring, daffodils, tulips and hyacinths. And the more the colours clashed, the better. But this garden is not only for pleasure, it's also a productive garden. And so we've got a herb bed. The box border still has a long way to go, but the smell from the herbs is wonderful. From the list of produce sold in Thacker's shop, Toby decided to go for a selection of Mediterranean herbs. The oregano, with its soft head of pink-red flowers, is certainly popular with the bees. The fennel was a Victorian favourite for soups and mackerel sauce, and the elegant leaves were commonly used as a garnish. We can expect it to grow to 4 foot, although after 3 years it will be past its best and should be replaced. And in the well-dug vegetable beds, the sea kale is now ready to eat. Mrs. Beaton recommends stewing it for half an hour in a good brown gravy. The cardoons have grown these wonderful great purple thistleheads. They'll soon reach 6 foot, forming a discreet screen between the vegetable beds and the lawns. And what's more, you can braise the blanched leaf stems, which will taste of artichoke. It's amazing to think that every city in Victorian Britain used to be full of these detached pleasure gardens, and now there are only 4 left. And here, we're getting just a glimpse into that lost world. The delphiniums were the pride of Victorian flower shows, and we've planted 30 of them. With their striking colours and great height, they'll soon fill the spaces in these borders. And that is what the Victorians were after. Borders full of texture and colour, novelty and exotica. So this salvia, with its large, woolly silver leaves, is ideal, and in time will grow white, hooded flowers 1 metre high. The Victorians loved majestic plants, and these hollyhocks with their blousy petals and towering stems were at the height of vogue. And no doubt, with their relentless energy, they probably found the problems of slugs, rust and blowing over in the wind a positive challenge. One of the popular misconceptions about the Victorians is that they were a dour, repressed people, and there's absolutely no evidence for this at all. In fact, on the contrary, they were an incredibly enthusiastic, lusty people. It was a culture that did everything to excess. So they would have gardened in the same spirit. And in many ways, it was a halcyon time at the end of the 19th century. Very confident, the empire was there, they could make anything, they felt as though they ruled the world. And practice they practically did. And they reaped the harvest of it in every way, even in a little garden like here.
Lost Gardens returns next week. Coming up tonight, follow the lives and loves of the creatures under constant scrutiny on land and under the water in the Aussie seaside drama of Penguin Island, tonight at 8 on ABC One.